Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 21st of June 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion.
Now this article, Ring of Fire will be visible in parts of North India today, appears on the last page of the newspaper, which talks about a very rare celestial event, an annular solar eclipse, which is popularly known as Ring of Fire eclipse, which will be visible, and it was visible in India. Now, understanding the mechanism behind the creation of solar eclipse is extremely important from the perspective of prelims examination, because awareness in the field of science and technology and space is very important, and questions have been asked on concepts related to space science. And for understanding the mechanism behind solar eclipse, we will have to look at how these celestial bodies, namely Sun, Earth and Moon, rotate with respect to each other. So as you can see in the animation, the Moon is constantly revolving around Earth, and at the same time Earth is rotating as well. And as you can see, the yellow arrow shows the direction from which the sunlight is coming. So if you take the orthographic view, or if you take the top view, you can see that constantly Moon is revolving around the Earth, and both are creating their own shadows denoted by the black line in space. And whenever these lines intersect each other, they cast shadows. Now we know that Moon completes its full circle in 27 days. And according to this animation, we should be seeing solar eclipse every 27 days, but that does not happen. And the reason behind that is the plane in which Moon orbits and the plane in which Earth orbits around the Sun are not parallel, which means that the orbit of the Moon is tilted to that of orbit of the Earth. And that is why, even though the top view shows that they intersect, but in reality they do not. And the shadow of the Moon not always coincides or is not always projected on the surface of the Earth. But there are coincidences in which this happens. So you can see that this is that position where Sun, Moon and Earth align themselves in a single straight line, and that is when we have eclipse. Now to understand this even clearer, we have an image where the four positions of the Sun, Earth and Moon have been drawn. And as you can see, the images on the left and right, both of them don't cast any shadow on Earth, because Moon in these conditions is not lying in the same plane as the Sun and the Earth. Whereas if you consider the images on the top and bottom, in both the cases, Moon is exactly in the straight line and it lies on the node point where the Sun, Moon and Earth align themselves. And these are the two positions where the solar eclipse is created. But then again, question arises that if these are the two conditions where solar eclipse exist, then it should occur twice every year, because ultimately Earth crosses these two nodes twice every year. That does not happen because of two reasons. Now you see the orbits here are not completely circular. Both the orbits, the orbit of the Earth around the Sun and the orbit of the Moon around the Earth. And because of these elliptical nature of these orbits, such coincidences do not repeat themselves in a year, but around in 18 months. Now I hope the effort we have made makes it easier for you to understand these concepts. But if you are being exposed to these ideas for the first time, you might face difficulties in understanding, and there's no problem in that. You can watch this in repeat and think over it. Now moving on to different kinds of eclipses and why different locations on the surface of the Earth perceive the same solar eclipse with different patterns. And that is because of various kinds of shadows being cast by the Moon's interference in the path of Sun and Earth. So first we will take up the total solar eclipse. Now a total solar eclipse is a condition when the dark silhouette of the Moon completely obscures the intensely bright light of Sun. In other words, you can say that to our eyes, since Moon and Sun appear of the same size, Moon completely covers the Sun. Now you obviously know that Sun is much bigger than Moon. But at the same time, you should also keep this fact in mind that Moon is much closer to the Earth as well. And Coincidentally, the moon is about 400 times smaller than the sun, but at the same time it also happens to be about 400 times closer. And the result is that from Earth, they appear to be the same size, and when the sun and moon and Earth come in straight line, the moon has the capacity to completely overshadow the sun. And as you can see in the image, the areas where this, as you can see on this screen, the area where this happens is known as umbra region. The areas of the world lying in those black shadow region will observe complete overshadowing of sun by moon. Now the next type of eclipse is that of annular eclipse, which we have seen from India today. Now this is different from the total solar eclipse. The sky will darken definitely, but with what appears as a twilight also, since so much of the sun still shows around. Now the difference between the total and annular eclipse is that the moon in this case is a little bit smaller than the sun to cover it completely. Now you remember that the distance between the sun and the earth is not always constant because it is an elliptical orbit, and when that distance changes, the apparent size of the sun also changes. When earth comes closer to the sun and when solar eclipse happens at that time, the sun appears larger and moon cannot completely cover it. And then finally, a partial eclipse occurs when the sun and moon are not exactly in the line with the earth and moon, only partially obscures the sun. This phenomena can usually be seen from a large part of the earth outside the track of annular or total eclipse, as can be seen with the grey shadow. So all those regions with the grey shadow shall be observing the partial eclipse. Now the question arises that how this shadow moves over the surface of the earth. And for that, as you can see on this screen, as the relative position of the moon, sun and earth is constantly changing on every instant, this change leads to the motion of the shadow region over the surface of the earth. Now all the things which we have discussed will be found in the PDF. Go through those notes to try to understand this concept even better. So the next article which we have taken up appears on page number 12. How are the Rajya Sabha polls different? Now the focus of this discussion will be only one aspect of Rajya Sabha, and that is election. The composition, allocation, nomination and representatives of the states and UTs, and what is the difference between the constitutional provision of representatives of the states and union territories, what is single transferable vote, and what are some peculiar traits of voting as far as election for Rajya Sabha is concerned. Now what you're seeing on screen is basically for the Prelims Pointer purposes. We are going to have these discussions in a detailed manner using original constitution. Now this topic belongs to the core portion of the polity, and usually aspirants refer to some textbook. But at the same time, it is very important for us to have a look at the actual constitution to understand the provisions which are there in it. Also, Rajya Sabha has been a continuing theme in the prelims examination, and almost every year there is a question. For example, in 2016 prelims examination, the question was asked, the Parliament of India acquires the power to legislate on any item in the state list in the national interest if a resolution to that effect is passed by. And obviously the answer is Rajya Sabha by a majority of not less than 2/3 of its members present and voting. Similarly, in prelims examination 2018, a question was asked with reference to the election of the President of India. Consider the following statements. Statement 1. The value of vote of each MLA varies from state to state, which is obviously correct. And the second statement is the value of vote of MPs of Lok Sabha is more than the value of vote of MPs of Rajya Sabha, which is incorrect because every elected member of either house of parliament will have the same value of vote. And hence the right answer is A, 1 only. So you see the process of election of president has already been asked and many questions on Rajya Sabha have been asked. So we will understand the procedure and the process of elections to the Rajya Sabha from Constitution of India. So all the matters related to the parliament, be it Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, are dealt in part 5 of the Constitution, which deals with the Union. In that, Article 79 directly deals with the Constitution of Parliament, Article 80 deals with the composition of Council of States, and Article 81 deals with the composition of House of the People. So we are going to limit ourselves to the provisions of Article 80 and we will try to understand how the system of proportional representation and single transferable vote works. So according to the Constitution of India, the Parliament consists of the President and the two houses to be known respectively as Council of States and House of the People. So whenever we talk about Parliament, you should keep in mind that President is also the part of Parliament, because no legislation can be passed without the approval of both the houses and President. Now moving on to the article which will be the focus of our discussion, that is Article 80, Composition of the Council of States. Now as far as the composition of Council of States is concerned, the Council of States shall consist of 12 members to be nominated by the President and not more than 238 representatives of the states and the union territories. And of course, the allocation of the seats in the Council of States to be filled by representatives of the states and union territories shall be in accordance with the provisions in that behalf contained in 4th schedule. Now let's quickly have a look at the 4th schedule. And if you focus at the subheading of this 4th schedule, you will see Article 4.1 and Article 82 written. So Article 80 is the one which we are discussing right now, but Article 4.1 also affects 4th schedule, which basically talks about how if you are rearranging the states or you're changing the areas or subdividing or merging various states, so obviously there will be some consequences on the 4th schedule as well. Because if you change the states and their areas and the population, you're obviously going to change the number of Rajya Sabha seats to that state. And that will obviously have repercussions on 4th schedule. And here, if you focus on 4th schedule, the names of the states have been written on the left side, whereas the seats allocated to them have been written on the right side. And if you focus on item 1 and 2, they are Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, which were earlier a single state, Andhra Pradesh. Later on, when it was bifurcated, due to the provisions of Article 4.1, it led to the changes in the 4th schedule, which is the representation in Rajya Sabha as well. Coming back to Article 80, since we have discussed both 1 and 2, let's now move on to Clause 3, which basically specifies the categories among which the President can nominate distinguished people into Rajya Sabha. And those are literature, science, art, and social service. But the core theme for this discussion is about system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, because Article 84 says the representatives of each states in the Council of States shall be elected by the elected members of legislative assemblies of the states in accordance with this system. So as far as the representatives of the states are concerned, Constitution has already defined the process. Whereas if you have a look at what it says about the representatives of the union territories, it does not define any process, because it says that the representatives of the union territories in the Council of States shall be chosen in such manner as Parliament may by law prescribe. So this is one of the most important things to remember. As far as the representatives of the states are concerned, the process is well defined, and that is single transferable vote, proportional representation. But as far as the representatives of the union territories are concerned, it is not defined by the Constitution. And accordingly, Parliament has enacted two laws, Representation of the Peoples Act 1950 and 1951. And these procedures are dealt in Representation of the People Act 1950, according to which, for the purpose of filling any seat in the Council of States allocated to Union Territory of Delhi and Puducherry, the Electoral College shall be same as Legislative Assembly. So basically, to summarize everything, Constitution provided for the manner of election and electoral college for the states, but it did not do so for union territories, and it left it to the Parliament. But Parliament, through Representations of the People's Act 1950, made the process uniform and even. So now we'll understand the single transferable vote and how it works, because it is not very easy to understand how it works, simply because it is very different from the voting procedure we are habitual, that is of general elections. So in single transferable vote, each voter ranks the list of candidates in order of preference. In the ballot paper, they place one beside their most preferred candidate and two beside their second most preferred, and so on. And hence you can see on the screen a representative ballot paper of a voter looks something like this. The completed ballot paper contains the candidates in order of preference as marked by the voter. So if there are 4 contestants, the person has marked A as his first choice and C as her second choice. But before we go into the voting procedure, another important concept is the minimum number of valid votes required for a candidate to be declared elected, and that is decided on a basis of formula, which is known as quota. The quota calculation depends on the number of seats to be filled. As you can see, it finds its place in the denominator of the formula. So at an election where only 1 seat is to be filled, every ballot paper is deemed to be the value of 1, and the quota is calculated by adding the value credited to all the candidates and dividing the total by 2 and adding 1 to the quotient, ignoring the remainder if any, and the resulting number is the quota. So let's now assume that each elector has cast his or her vote. And finally, the counting process has started. So as we know that there were 4 candidates A, B, C, D, and the number of total valid votes comes out to be 1235, out of which the candidate A has got the least number of votes, whereas the candidate C has got the highest number of votes. But do you think the candidate C can be declared as winner? No, because remember the quota. Then votes needed to win that 1 seat is 618.5, which means a person has to get at least 618 votes because remainder has to be ignored to qualify as winner. And here nobody seems to have that kind of votes. So what single transferable vote system means is that vote is transferred from one candidate to another in 2 situations. The first situation is when a candidate has polled so few votes that his or her chances of being elected is null, and hence all of his or her vote are liable to be wasted. And hence, in the first round of counting, the person who has got the least number of votes is eliminated, and when he is eliminated, his votes are transferred to other 3 candidates. And how is this transfer takes place? Because these 235 people have placed candidate A on their first preference. And see, all those people who voted candidate A as their first preference, what was their second preference? So for example, in this case, the second preference was C. And hence transfer takes place in proportion of the second preference votes received by the other 3 candidates in those ballots. So for example, in this case, out of the 235 ballots with a first preference votes to A, 30 of them had B as their second choice, and hence those votes shall be transferred to B. B's total to 330. Similarly, 170 of those had second preference to C, making his total to 620. 35 of them had voted their second preference to D, making D's total to 285. Now if you remember, the minimum vote required for election is 618, and hence candidate C is the winner because she has managed to get 2 more votes than required quota. Now, the second aspect of single transferable vote is that if a candidate gets more than the quota, the extra votes are again reallocated to the remaining contestants if there are more seats to be filled. But since in this case there was only 1 seat, the process has ended and candidate C is the winner. Now the next article we have taken up, who does Galwan Valley belongs to? And it appears on FAQ page, that is page number 12. Now Galwan Valley has been highlighted due to the recent conflict between India and China. Especially on June 15, the worst violence on the India-China border since 1967 has claimed the lives of around 20 Indian soldiers. So it is in this backdrop that it is very important for us to keep in mind few of the things. And this particular article exactly does the same for us. Now first and foremost, where is Galwan River and where is the valley? So obviously the valley will be the surrounding area of the river itself, and the river originates in Aksai Chin. It flows in the eastern direction and meets the Shyok River. As you can see, we have drawn the diagram for you. And this confluence of Shyok and Galwan River is the flashpoint. Because this valley is strategically located between the border of India and China. And the trouble emerges because of the differing perception of line of actual control or LAC. Because when the LAC was mutually agreed between India and China, it was far in the eastern region, giving India access to this whole piece of land which totally covers the Galwan Valley. Now, what China has done that it has unilaterally shifted in the western direction and much closer to the place where these two rivers meet each other, and hence China is now laying claim to the much larger region which was mutually agreed earlier on. Now, the question arises that by citing these territorial claims, can China alter the line of actual control? And towards this end, the article highlights that territorial claims are not same as LAC claims. The distinction between territorial claims and LAC claims, although is sometimes blurred, but they are not exactly the same. For example, the LAC refers to the territory under the effective control of each side, not to their entire territorial claim. As we have discussed in the previous DNS, we clearly understood that the map of India still shows the territorial claim of the Aksai Chin. But in reality, India's effective control lies over much smaller region of the Ladakh as compared to what is shown on the map. So the territorial claim is very different from LAC claim. And similarly, by unilaterally changing the line of actual control and shifting it does not give the Chinese territorial claims over those regions. So this is the overall summary of this article. Also, there is another article which is quite similar to this and deals with the Galwan Valley but with historical perspective. A spur in the grand rivalry appears on page number 13. Again, this article focuses on Galwan Valley and Galwan River, but it also brings in historical perspective of why this region is so important. And that is because in past, Britain and Russia were in political and diplomatic confrontation due to increasing influence of each of them. So if you consider the scenario of 19th century, this whole region demarcated by red was governed by British India, and the Imperial Russia had reached to its borders, and there were many fronts across which both of them were trying to forestall each other's influence. Few of these flashpoints were in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and the third flashpoint was in Ladakh region where British India tried everything to stop Imperial Russia from entering through Karakoram into British India. So according to the author, Galwan Valley has always been a bone of contention between two powers. Earlier it was between British India and Imperial Russia. Right now it is between India and China. Now historically, the Galwan Valley has been positioned in such a manner that it connects Leh with Kashgar region of China, which lies somewhere over here, and Galwan Valley lies somewhere over here. And it is positioned between Leh and Kashgar, which were the two trading points in ancient and medieval history. Of course, after the creation of the nation states, these two regions are no more connected because of the international boundaries between them. But nonetheless, in the past, Galwan Valley was an important location on the lucrative trade route through Karakoram. Now, Karakoram Pass, which lies somewhere over here, is currently controlled by China. And the nearest location to that is Daulat Beg Oldie, which is controlled by our country. But earlier, there was no road directly connecting Daulat Beg Oldie to Leh. And hence, Government of India decided to construct Darbuk Shiok Daulat Beg Oldie Road, which connects all these three locations. And in constructing such a road, India had full right to construct this road because, as you can see, LAC lies over here. The recent flashpoint which has occurred is very near to from where the road is being constructed. Now the question arises that why China wants to have a location in its control in this region. And obviously you can see that it wants to manage and station its troops on this strategically very important road which India is constructing, so that in future when standoff takes place or war takes place between India and China, China can immediately block this road. Now the question arises, why is Daulat Beg Oldie so important for India? It is important because because the Karakoram Pass is within the striking range from Daulat Beg Oldie. So you can see that how the interests of two nations are colliding strategically in very remote and frontier areas where not very significant population lives. Now, the article Government Invites Global Vessel Owners to Flag Ships in India appears on page number 10. Now, this flagging of ships is important from the perspective of prelims examination. And just the term itself can be asked, and you could be asked to identify the correct meaning of it. Now, according to the Ministry of Shipping, maritime transport accounts for around 95% of India's trade by volume. However, the foreign registered ships carry almost 92% of India's cargo. So you can see how grim the situation is. Only 8% of the cargo is being carried out by Indian or domestically registered ships. And to make the matters worse, the total number of Indian registered vessels is hardly around 460. Now, this is financially also extremely expensive because India ends up paying more than $52 billion on an annual basis to foreign ships for carrying our own freight. Hence, in order to address the problem, Ministry of Shipping has recently invited global ship owners to flag their ships in India. Now, as far as the meaning is concerned, in shipping sector, a ship flies the flag of the country where it is registered and not where it is manufactured. And accordingly, that ship is subjected to the same taxation regime of the same country of which it holds the flag. Hence, flagging of ships in India would mean that global ship owners would register their ships in India. Now, these ships would fly Indian flags and would be involved in both international as well as coastal trade. Now, to understand the rationale behind such a step taken by our government, one of them we have already discussed, that minuscule amount of Indian registered ships operate right now. But apart from that, there is also a major reason, and that is, if you see the countries across the world such as China and Japan, they have developed a strong national shipping fleet. Even a small country like Singapore has much more developed shipping fleet. However, as we saw, in India there are only 460 registered ships so far. Apart from that, we need to realize that India has a vast coastline of 7,500 kilometers and a strategic location which is close to major shipping lines, and hence it has the potential to get benefited from the expanding maritime trade. Now, if you talk about the benefits which have been announced in terms of flagging of ships and encouraging flagging of ships in our country, recently the government has revised the Make in India policy for public procurement. As per the stated policy, the government would not issue global tender for the procurement of services below the value of 200 crores. So obviously the preference would be given to domestically registered companies in case of public procurement which is below 200 crores. Now, one of the major constraints in flagging of ships in our country is the lack of level playing field between Indian flag and foreign flag vessels. And that is mainly on account of unfavorable taxation regime and poor operating conditions in our country. Now, there are two more terms related to shipping which you would like to keep in mind. And first one is cabotage rules. Now, cabotage refers to the movement of goods between two ports in the same country. And it is important because recently the shipping ministry eased the cabotage rules to enable the foreign owned vessels to perform cabotage operations without the need of any special approval. And hence this term has been highlighted in last 1 year. And the second important term is right of first refusal. Now, this policy has been unveiled by shipping ministry to give higher preference to Indian shipping vessels. Now, under this policy, if a tender for the movement of cargo has been awarded to a foreign registered vessel which was based on bidding, then the entity owning the Indian registered vessel can back the same contract by paying the lowest bid amount. For example, let's say ONGC has put out a tender of movement of its petroleum products. Now, such a tender would be awarded to the lowest bidder. And let's say that the lowest bidder here is a company which is registered in Singapore, and hence we call it S. And let's say the bid amount was 200 crore. Now, an entity whose ship has been registered in India can exercise an option to pay the bid amount and get the contract away from this foreign ship. Now this has been done to boost Make in India. Let's now move on for the prelims summary. From the perspective of prelims examination, it is important to keep in mind Chapter 2 of Part 5 deals with the Parliament and Article 80 specifically deals with composition, allocation, nomination and representation from states and UTs in Rajya Sabha. As far as the members are concerned, 12 are nominated and not more than 238 are elected members of state and UTs. The allocation to each state and UT is written in 4th schedule of our constitution. Nomination is done on the basis of literature, science, art and social services. As far as the representatives of the states are concerned, they are chosen on the basis of proportional representation via single transferable vote, and representation of the UTs has not been specified in the constitution of our country and was left for the parliament to decide, and they have amended the Representation of the People's Act 1950 to provide for similar procedure as has been followed for the states. As far as the single transferable vote system is concerned, keep in mind that on every step, the person who gets the lowest vote gets eliminated and his or her votes are transferred to the people who are still in race. There is a quota, which is the minimum amount of vote needed to get elected, and that has been given in the PDF. Now we are in habit of exercising our vote in secrecy, but there is no secret ballot for Rajya Sabha elections, and Rajya Sabha polls are performed on a system of open ballot. But of course this openness is quite limited. Now this measure has been adopted to check rampant cross voting, which was taken to mean that the vote has been purchased by corrupt means. Now what happens is that a system has been developed where each party MLA shows his or her marked ballot to the party's authorized agent before they cast their vote. Now this process is extremely important because it decides the validity of the votes. Because if an MLA fails to show the vote to his or her authorized agent, that vote shall be invalid. And in case if the person shows his or her vote to any other person apart from that authorized one, then also that vote shall become invalid. Now as far as applicability of none of the above is concerned, we know that it has been applicable to general elections, but a notification by Election Commission of India was nullified by Supreme Court, saying that none of the above option is only for general elections which are held on the basis of universal adult suffrage and cannot be applied to indirect elections. Now a question arises that a person who has been elected as an MLA but has still not taken an oath, can she still vote? And the answer is yes. Because again, Supreme Court has said that voting for Rajya Sabha election is a non-legislative function and mandatory oath is required only to perform legislative functions. From the perspective of prelims examination, the location of Galwan River, its origination point, its flow pattern, as well as it is a tributary of which river is important. And all these things are written over here. Also important is to remember Dabruk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie Road and how is it interfering with the plans China have for this region. The locations of Leh, Dabruk, Shok, Galwan, Daulat Beg Oldie, Karakoram Pass all become very important. And finally, terms related to shipping like flagging, cabotage and right of first refusal are important. Now the question of the day for 20th June 2010 was related to anti-defection law, and the right answer is A, one only. The question of the day for today is consider the following statements. Statement 1, Galwan River is a tributary of Nubra River. Statement 2, Galwan-Nubra confluence is towards the west of Leh. A, one only, B, two only, C, both 1 and 2, D, neither 1 nor 2.